Hi readers, Lee here. Welcome back to my channel, Lila Wanders and Reads. Now normally I would be doing my week in books today, Monday, but today is Veterans Day, so I'm going to do my first ever Veterans Day post, which would normally be on a Book Talk Tuesday. So tomorrow, Tuesday, I'll post my week in books, but today I want to talk about veterans. And for me, for this first Veterans Day, I had some different things I could talk about. Many in my family are veterans. My great-grandfather, my grandfather, my father, myself, my sister, my uncle. So I could have talked about that, but I thought for this very first one that I would make it personal and talk about some books that one of which I've read, all of which I plan to read at some point, but it does get a little bit difficult for me to talk about Afghanistan. So as I was preparing for this, I remembered that Stanley McChrystal, in My Share of the Task, said some really great things about Afghanistan and how it, reaches out and grabs your soul and makes it unforgettable. But then I went to reread it to prepare for this video, and I found this, which he published this in like 2013, so way before the end. And this seems almost prescient. As the story unfolds, many things appear. Extraordinary sacrifice and teamwork, often alongside an atmosphere of mistrust, uncertainty, media scrutiny, and politics. There is a temptation to seek a single hero or culprit, a person, a group, or policy that emerges as the decisive factor. This makes for better intrigue, but it's also false drama. To do so is to oversimplify the war, the players, and Afghanistan itself. Because despite their relevance as contributing factors, I found no single personality, decision, relationship, or event that determined the outcome or even dominated the direction of events. Afghanistan did that. Only Afghanistan, with her deep scars and opaque complexity, emerged as the essential reality and the dominant character. On her brutal terrain and in the minds of her people, the struggle was to be waged and decided. No outcome was preordained, but nothing would come easily. Few things of value do. And in retrospect, it just seems very sad and very prescient, is that what I said? That he would write that and that ultimately Afghanistan would be decided by Afghans and Afghanistan. So, no more Debbie Downer. Well, maybe a little bit more. So I tried to organize these. First of all, let me back up. I highly recommend this book. It is not just about Afghanistan. It is about General McChrystal's life and career. It's a memoir. It talks about his time in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and elsewhere. And I highly recommend it. It was really, really, really a good read, an easy read. So I tried to put the rest of these in a kind of order. I bookended them with a book that kind of encompasses all of Afghanistan, air quotes, and a book that ends the same way. But the rest of them I tried to put chronologically in order. So we're going to start out with 12 Strong by Doug Stanton. I have started this book, but then I got a little bit mad, and I put it down, so I'll have to restart it. I got mad because of the way they talked about one of the Afghan languages, and it seemed to me dismissive and not really accurate. So sometimes with Afghanistan, I need to step away for a few years to be able to read about it without taking it personally or getting offended when somebody Americanizes something or describes something from their American standpoint. Not that I'm not American, but it's difficult to explain. Anywho. 12 Strong. I've already taken off my glasses. What the hell is going on? 12 Strong is a major motion picture. I think I've watched part of it, but again, I either really like a movie about Afghanistan or I don't at all. So 12 Strong was previously published as Horse Soldiers. It's the dramatic account of a small band of Special Forces soldiers who secretly entered Afghanistan following 9/11 and rode to war on horses against the Taliban. The soldiers combined ancient strategies of cavalry warfare with 21st century bombing technology to perform a seemingly impossible feat. Outnumbered 40-1, they pursued the enemy across the mountainous Afghanistan terrain and captured the city of Mazar-e-Sharif, which was strategically essential to defeat their opponent throughout the country. The bone-weary American soldiers were welcomed as liberators, and the streets thronged with Afghans overjoyed that the Taliban regime had been overthrown. Then, the action took a wholly unexpected turn. During a surrender of 600 Taliban troops, the horse soldiers were ambushed by the would-be POWs. Dangerously overpowered, they fought for their lives in the city's immense fortress, Qala-e-Jangi, or the House of War. At risk were the military gains of the entire campaign. If the soldiers perished or were captured, I just thought of a great story idea, and I just need to take a moment and write it down. Sorry. My bad. Okay, all right, sorry, we were at the House of War. At risk were the military gains of the entire campaign. If the soldiers perished or were captured, the courageous effort to outmaneuver the Taliban was likely doomed. So Doug Stanton is the author of The Odyssey of Echo Company, the 1968 Tet Offensive, and the epic battle to survive the Vietnam War. New York Times bestseller In Harm's Way, The Sinking of the USS Indianapolis, and the extraordinary story of its survivors. He's a founder of the National Writers Series, a year-round book festival, and he lives in Traverse City, Michigan with his wife and 3 children. I know somebody who is from near Traverse City. 2 people. Hi, Ruth and Luke. They're not from Traverse City, but small world, isn't it? So I'm going to have to put this on the read soon, and this is not in my game plan for the end of the year. I'm going to reread this. I'll have to figure out how to do that, how to make this work. I've got so many plans for the end of the year, and I don't want to get started on them because that's not what this video is about. So, I've not read any of the rest of these books at all, but I have them, and one day I may read them. One day I will read them, inshallah. Next up, so 12 Strong, secret mission going into Afghanistan right after 9/11. Next up is the untold story of Operation Anaconda. That is Not a Good Day to Die by Sean Naylor. So Sean Naylor, and I'm going into a little bit about these authors for a specific reason. It wasn't initially planned, but then something funny happened. So Sean Naylor is a Canadian journalist, and he is, I think currently, according to my Google search, the national security correspondent for Yahoo News, and he spent some time with the Army Times, also some time embedded. So as of this, when he published this book, he was a distinguished senior writer from the Army Times, had covered the Afghan Mujahideen's war against the Soviets and American military operations in Somalia, Haiti, Bosnia, Afghanistan, and Iraq. His coverage of Operation Anaconda earned him the White House Correspondents Association's prestigious Edgar A. Poe Award. Anywho, let's get back to what Not a Good Day to Die is about. Obviously, it's about Operation Anaconda. So, I'm going to read the blurb first. Award-winning combat reporter Sean Naylor reveals how close American forces came to disaster in Afghanistan against al-Qaeda. After easily defeating the ragtag Taliban that had sheltered the terrorist organization behind the 9/11 attacks. At dawn, On March 2nd, 2002, over 200 soldiers of the 101st Airborne and the 10th Mountain Divisions flew into the mouth of a buzzsaw in Afghanistan's Shahikot Valley. Believing the war all but over, U.S. military leaders refused to commit the extra infantry, artillery, and attack helicopters required to fight the war's biggest battle. A missed opportunity to crush hundreds of al-Qaeda fighters and some of its most senior leaders. Eyewitness Naylor vividly portrays the heroism of the young, untested soldiers, unprepared for the ferocious enemy they fought, the mistakes that led to a hellish mountaintop firefight, and how 13 American commandos embodied Patton's 3 principles of war: audacity, audacity, and audacity, by creeping unseen over frozen mountains into the heart of an enemy stronghold to prevent a U.S. military catastrophe. I have no idea how long I've had this book. Obviously, it's been a long time. There are pictures in it. I do not know when I will ever get to this. Checking for something. Okay. So, yeah. I would like to read this really soon. I just don't know when I'll get to it. Again, I've had to, on this one it's particularly, I had to just take a step back and get some distance from Afghanistan. It's, even before the fall, it made me sad, and there are things that were just hurt my heart to read about. Anywho. Alrighty. Next up, something I really don't know much about, but this is where the funny part comes in, and I will tell you about it at the end. So next up is The Interrogators, Task Force 500 and America's Secret War Against Al-Qaeda by Chris Mackey and Greg Miller. Now, I'm just assuming here. So everybody knows about Abu Ghraib. That happened in Iraq. This is Afghanistan, 2 different countries. And I say that not to be facetious, but after my first deployment to Afghanistan, I came back to my civilian job in Louisiana at the time. And at that point, the Iraq War was also going on, and they had found some gold or something from Saddam Hussein's palace or whatever, wherever. I don't know. I wasn't there. I wasn't in that country. And even if I had been, that's a big country. So somebody came to me. I had come back from Afghanistan, and they asked me about Saddam Hussein's gold. And I just bit my tongue because I didn't want to say that's in a completely different country. I wasn't anywhere near that. And again, even if I had been, it's a whole country. It's like Texas. You know, you can be in El Paso and something happens in Dallas and you don't know about it. But anyway, not comparing Iraq to Texas size-wise. I don't know how they compare. So I'm just threw that out. Like, anyway. Although more appropriately would be like, because at the time I was working in Northeast Louisiana, it's like if something happened in New Orleans, people come in to ask us about it. Did you see that? No, it's like 6 hours away. Anywho, back to, I've lost focus. In a narrative that reads like a spy thriller, Chris Mackey takes us inside a small team of American military interrogators confronting an enemy unlike any other they have ever seen. In a war not of missiles and tanks, but of sleeper cells and suicide bombers. Mackey reveals how his team managed to crack some of the hardest cases, using highly sophisticated ruses and elaborate trickery to bluff, worry, and confuse their opponents into yielding precious information. He tells as well of mistakes made, blown interrogations, abuses against prisoners, and failures of American intelligence. The Interrogators is an engrossing memoir that lifts the curtain for the first time on the hidden backstage of America's war on terrorism. So this was copyrighted 2004 by Chris Mackey and Greg Miller. Now, bear in mind that when I was doing my little Google searches for this video, I Google searched Chris Mackey and Greg Miller, and I also looked on Goodreads for Chris Mackey. And I was confused. Now, you know, sometimes Goodreads will have an author and have books attributed to him that are actually by someone of the same name, but different person entirely. So I started looking at Chris Mackey, and he's got several books about synchronicity, and he's a clinical psychologist, and I am thinking, what the fuck would he know about interrogations in Afghanistan? Greg Miller, I looked him up, no problem. Reporter for the Washington Post, at least now. So that made some sort of sense, but I could not figure out what Chris Mackey, Australian psychologist, clinical psychologist, had to do with interrogations. Finally, and I should have just picked up the book, finally I went to the publisher's website and I found a picture of him, and he did not look at all like the Australian clinical psychologist. And then as I sat down to do this, I realized I could have just looked on the back of the book and found out that Chris Mackey, the one who wrote this book or co-wrote this book, is not an Australian clinical psychologist. This Chris Mackey joined the Army at 17 and was assigned to the Intelligence Corps as an interrogator. After a 9/11, he was recalled to the United States. Recalled to the United States? Huh. I wonder where he was. Assigned to Task Force 500 and subsequently sent to Kandahar, Afghanistan. Now I want to know where he was if he was recalled to the United States. Huh. It might say so. Actually, this doesn't... Yet another book. I almost coughed. I did cough. Anyway, yet another book I want to read, and I don't know when I'll get to. Anywho, let's get back to this. Greg Miller, the co-author, at the time of this printing, was a national security correspondent for the LA Times, and was the only American reporter granted access to U.S. interrogators. Now, of course, like I mentioned, he works for the Washington Post, or at least now, as of my latest Google search. So, this actually looks really good. The writing looks accessible. Also, the font is fairly large. I'm a big fan of that. Next up is a book I have probably talked about, and I was torn between leaving this one in and going up to get another book about kind of the same subject. That was Jake Tapper's Outpost, but it was upstairs, and I decided not to go upstairs. So, again, I've probably talked about this before. This is War by Sebastian Junger. This is a book I believe I bought this year. It is... I bought this on May 31st, 2024. Got to get this book buying under control. I've already been to Barnes & Noble today. Bought 2 books. Okay. So War was published in copyright 2010. Afterward, copyright 2011. So around that time, it's been just over 10 years ago. Over 15 months, Sebastian Junger followed a single platoon based at a remote Afghan outpost. His objective, to convey what soldiers experience, what war actually feels like. In this book, he describes things that few civilians will ever go through. The numbing anticipation of battle, the automatic risks soldiers take during combat to protect their brothers, the adrenaline-fueled confusion of being ambushed. Throughout, Junger draws on biology, psychology, and military history to explain the decisions they make and put their ordeals in context. The result is an acutely observed and heartfelt depiction of something young men have lived for millennia, and that remains, even today, the ultimate test of character. So as of this writing, I did not look up what Sebastian Junger does now. Obviously, he's an author. But as of this printing, he was a contributing editor to Vanity Fair and the New York Times, best-selling author of Tribe and The Perfect Storm, created the documentary Restrepo, which I've not seen, but did win the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance. Again, as with the rest of these books, except the one that I've read, I really want to look at reading one of these. I am currently reading a rather long book for November. It is on women in 19th century literature, and that's going to take me the rest of the month. So it's unlikely I'll get to any of these this month. Next up, I wanted to showcase a book about a person. I found this book when I had gone over a year or two ago to the Kinston area, Eastern North Carolina area, for a friend's daughter's birthday party or baby shower or something like that. And I had time to kill, so I stopped in the Barnes & Noble. And because it is so near Camp Lejeune, they had a lot of books, military books, like we do here where I live, but different books because it's more Marine focused. I do not know. Yes, this is a Marine Lance Corporal. So this book is by Medal of Honor recipient Kyle Carpenter. It's called You Are Worth It, Building a Life Worth Fighting For. I do not usually buy self-help books, but I did buy 2 books that are kind of in that vein, that were about veterans who were recovering from either massive trauma or just being a veteran. This is by Kyle Carpenter and Don Yaeger. I do not know who Don Yaeger is. I did not look it up. But let's go. On November 21st, 2010, U.S. Marine Lance Corporal Kyle Carpenter was posted atop a building in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, when an enemy grenade skittered toward Kyle and fellow Marine Nick Eufrazio. Without hesitation, Kyle jumped on the grenade, saving Nick, but sacrificing his own body. As legendary as Kyle's combat actions have become, it's what happens next that defines his story. Kyle's heart flatlined 3 times while being evacuated off the battlefield in Afghanistan. Severely wounded from head to toe, it would take years to reconstruct his body. Yet his spirit was unbroken. Meeting his challenges in the face, he battled back to forge a life of joyful purpose. 3 years after his devastating injuries, Kyle walked into the White House to receive the nation's highest military decoration, the Medal of Honor, for his singular act of courage on that rooftop in Afghanistan. There's some weird thing about Rachel Hollis in this last... Oh, okay. It must be quoting her. Anyway, I'm not going to read it because it's very confusing. Jim Mattis calls this a compelling account of life well lived against the toughest odds, one that will inspire every reader. Jocko Willink calls Kyle a true hero and a model of how to live. I am not sure when I'll get to this, but I do plan to read this. This is kind of a sad one because it's just not only his sacrifice, but also seeing pictures of Afghans in Afghanistan. It really is, kind of heartbreaking. But I did, in addition to the others, I said I wanted to highlight this because this is about a person. This is about a veteran. And there are a lot of Afghan veterans out there, some scarred on the outside, some scarred on the inside. And I just really wanted to focus on a person. So, finally, this, I believe, may not only talk about Afghanistan, but this is a book that my colleague read and told me about, and I resisted for like 2 days, and then I went and bought it because that's how I roll. That book is by all means available. Memoirs of a Life in Intelligence, Special Operations, and Strategy by Michael G. Vickers. I did not look him up this time. I will read a little bit about him because I did look him up before I went and bought the book. Hold on. The glasses chain is out of control. So, Michael G. Vickers has served multiple roles in the DoD and the intelligence community, most recently as Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence under President Barack Obama. He also served under Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama as the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations, Low-Intensity Conflict, and Interdependent Capabilities, where he had policy oversight of all U.S. military capabilities, from nuclear weapons to special ops forces. So, let's talk about how this bookends everything else, or serves as a bookend with the McChrystal book. This is about his life in special operations. In 1984, Michael Vickers took charge of the CIA's secret war against the Soviets in Afghanistan. After inheriting a strategy aimed at imposing costs on the Soviets for their invasion and occupation of Afghanistan, Vickers transformed the covert campaign into an all-out effort to help the Afghan resistance win their war. More than any other American, he was responsible for the outcome in Afghanistan that led to the end of the Cold War. And by all means available, Vickers recounts his remarkable career from his days as a Green Beret to his vision for victory in Afghanistan to his role in waging America's war with Al-Qaeda at the highest levels of government. In captivating detail, he depicts his years in the Special Forces, including his training to parachute behind enemy lines with a backpack nuclear weapon in the event of a Soviet invasion of Western Europe, and reveals how these experiences directly influenced his approach to shaping policy. Vickers has played a significant role in most of the military and intelligence operations of the past 4 decades, and he offers a deeply informed analysis of the greatest challenges facing America today and in the decades ahead. So it's his fight for Afghanistan against the Soviets, really for U.S. interests, led me to choose this as a bookend. Another book that I have is called Zinky Boys. It is about Soviet soldiers in Afghanistan back in the day. I'd really like to read that and compare it at some point to the U.S. experience in Afghanistan. Obviously, completely different strategies, completely different intents going in, but I would like to read that book one day too. I thought about finding it and pulling it out for this video, but it's really not about American veterans, and today is Veterans Day, and that's about American veterans. I saw on Threads or Twitter or one of the socials about somebody had said, you never know if this shit's true, to a veteran, thank you for your service, and they just shook their head. And I feel like some of us do get uncomfortable with that for various reasons, but I also feel like it's not an overreaction, but an effort that America took after 9/11 toward its service members to kind of make up for the way that service members were treated when they returned from Vietnam. So night and day experiences on returning home from our war versus my uncle's war. I don't know why I wanted to put that in there. Oh, I know why, because I was going to say thank you for your service, but thank you for your service. Thank me for my service. Thank my grandfather and everybody else. And thank you for watching. This has been kind of an off the cuff. I did have a little bit of fun with learning about the different Chris Mackeys in the world. If you've read any of these books, I'd love to hear what you think about them. If you have any other books that you recommend that I use for a future Veterans Day or that I read now, there's way too many books about veterans and not as many Veterans Days So I will probably do more veterans books throughout the year, like I have this year. Anywho, all over the place. Would love to hear you about any of these books if you've read them and have an opinion. As always, I will put links to each of them down in the description box. You can go to bookshop.org and pick one up. If you do that, you do support a local bookstore. You can choose which bookstore you want to support. That is it for me. Until tomorrow, I'll be back with my weekend books. Happy reading!